Right, so you should see an indication on whatever device you're using that we are now indeed recording. So welcome everyone to our weekly call on encrypted DNS. There'll be a few others joining over the next few minutes. As you're hopefully all aware, the focus of our call this afternoon is very much going to be on the exciting announcement last week at WWDC of Apple's support for both DoT and DoH within the operating systems, which unsurprisingly prompted both a lot of interest and a fair few questions. So on the back of that, some of you provided some questions through over email, which I've sort of collated and shared with Tommy. So we'll endeavour as best we can to go through ideally all of those if time permits, or certainly as many as possible. So with that in mind, let me hand over to Tommy. I don't know, Tom, if you wanted to say a few words first, or if you wanted to go straight into the questions, or how you wanted to play it. But
sure. I mean, in the interest of time, so we can probably go directly into the questions. So, if anyone hasn't seen kind of the summary, or
I could put them on the screen if that's useful.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, and while we're waiting. Yeah, so essentially we do have DoH and DoT support baked into the OS. At this point, the primary ways of using it are ways that applications could already use it on the system, either by kind of abusing VPN APIs and making themselves look like a VPN, or embedding their own resolution code. So the large part of this is moving all of that support into the system resolver using the system cache and trying to coexist well with things that the system knows about, like VPNs and captive portals and everything else. All right.
So hopefully you can see the questions on the screen, Tommy. They come on?
Yep, I do see them. Okay, so I guess I'll just read them out, and if people have follow-up questions or clarifications on these, we can do those. So do we have or endorse any particular privacy policy for DNS? No, and just also to clarify, I am speaking here as myself. I'm not a Apple marketing person. I'm not speaking anything there. All of the official details are in our WWDC presentations, but here, since we are not directing user traffic by default to any particular DNS server, we are still letting this all be user opt-in. The particular privacy policies are up to the apps and profiles that would deliver the encrypted DNS settings, in the same way that if someone installs a VPN configuration, the policy of using that particular VPN is up to the VPN provider, not to the operating system that allows you to do VPN functionality. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Can I ask a question, please? This is from Simon.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Department for Digital from the UK government. Within a state, would you see it as your role to have to take any cognizance of any state legislation, or would you see that function as belonging to the app?
Yeah, so for the functionality that we have released in these betas and in these versions of the OS, I believe that falls to the app and the user who is installing that, in the same way that there are not restrictions today that Apple as an operating system places on the user's ability to install a VPN or to install an application or a browser that chooses to use DNS or customizes DNS settings. So from that end, there is not any particularly new functionality here. It's being just baked into the OS in a new way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Will Apple enforce the use of its DNS API by apps, blocking those that use alternate methods? So, no, not right now. That'd be pretty heavy-handed to say, oh, we're going to block you from the App Store if you don't use the APIs you want. Particularly since these are very, very new. We certainly encourage applications to use the APIs that are best suited for their purposes. At this point, I don't think there would be anything strictly enforced. And if anything in the future, I mean, part of the issues with being a VPN app that tries to deliver encrypted DNS settings but doesn't tunnel any other traffic is that it shows up as a VPN. It has a VPN badge on the top. It doesn't allow you to run another VPN on the side of it. I can imagine having some sort of alert to the user of letting them know that, like, this thing you think is a VPN really isn't. It's just doing some DNS settings just for transparency, and that kind of discourages people from misusing it. But I don't think, I mean, at this point, there's no strict enforcement to force people to use a given API. Okay.
But all the Apple provided APIs will conform to the set that we are getting to later, right?
Yeah, the stuff we're going to talk about is what's given by those APIs. Yeah, and if you embed your own resolution code directly in your browser, you can't really guarantee much.
Okay.
And we'll try to discourage that by giving people the right options. Yeah. I think the bigger thing is that we don't want to see a proliferation of more apps kind of going around and doing their own DNS and avoiding the system. Oh, Paul. Does the system resolver validate locally? What do you mean, Paul?
Hi, sorry,
Well, the
I meant DNS validation. Sorry, DNSSEC.
DNSSEC? Not right now, but it will. We're working on it.
Awesome, great news.
Yeah, it's it's not directly tied to this. We do want DNSSEC for doing our automatic DoH discovery, and so we were working on that. It wasn't quite polished to the point we wanted, but we plan to have it on at some point. It may be a year out, but somewhere in there. Okay. All right. Discovery. In the absence of a discovery standard, how is the app developer to know which names are resolvable on the local network? So the context for this.
This question was mine. So
yeah, okay.
It's clearly when the app developer is writing their codes, they can, as well as nominating the encrypted resolver, they can also provide a list of domains that should not be used.
Yeah.
So how do they know how to populate that?
Yeah, I mean, so I am hoping, and maybe this is not going to happen, but a well-designed app or profile would let the user be able to specify something if they knew something about their own network. I think the bigger case for this is a lot of the enterprise cases, making sure that if I have a corporate network and I want to be able to say I work at Apple, and so my apple.com names when I'm on my work network need to be able to resolve there, that there is a way to say that. But yes, it is tricky to know what needs to go only on the local network. We were trying to make sure that the cases in which the system knows on their behalf already get an exception for captive networks, or the cellular services also go directly. I don't think we talked about it in our talk specifically, but cellular services also get an exception when we know what it's for. Generally beyond that, and like like the .dot local domain, on home networks, I don't imagine we would see too much issue. This is mainly for the enterprise cases that they need this configurability.
Guess you could have CPE with a local name potentially.
Yeah. So yeah, the hope is that this is configurable by whoever is using it. Paul says VPN can give a list of domains. Yes, and so VPN domains themselves are already an exception for split DNS VPN. The problem is when you're on a Wi-Fi network that's a enterprise 802.11 network, knowing which domains are actually your corporate domains and which ones are just your normal ones is not yet there. So that's what we need some standards for. So
sorry, Tommy, that made me laugh. Glad you're.
Hey,
future standards for how we split networks. We've only been at that what 30 years. but I love the optimism. Keep at it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe this is this area will encourage people to do it, because otherwise stuff will not work as well. And then that's kind of another reason why, for enabling this, we are having it up to the apps or the enterprise profiles, because kind of pushes the complexity there for the people who really want to use that to be able to do it right. Trying to express that and configure all of those details in a user-facing settings would be more than we want. So this is a step, but it's, you know, hopefully also highlighting what needs to be done more automatically. Okay, is this an inevitable free-for-all? Oh boy.
Can I just, that was written before you had added more details.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's certainly more nuanced now, and you've clarified that, yes, system-wide resolvers override, and automatically discovered resolvers, where the discovery is by the domain, they override, and then it's just the app. But the question is still, in the absence of being able to automatically detect a local encrypted resolver, does this inevitably mean that, you know, after the launch, a lot of services will begin to use encrypted DNS to resolvers that are nominated by the domain or by the app?
I mean, I can't predict the future of how many people will do it. Mainly, you know, the goal here is to say, all right, so Firefox builds this in. We don't necessarily want every app dropping in that entire, you know, grabbing that networking stack and not using some system resolver to be able to access it. The way that the API is expressed, as I've, you know, given some of the details on, is saying, I want these particular connections to require encrypted DNS for some reason. And that, I think, is something that is a good long-term thing to have, and say that, you know, I do have kind of this bar of reliability for the contents and making sure that it's not being intercepted or modified. And we'll say, I don't expect that a lot of apps would be doing pretty nuanced per domain splits of everything on their own. They certainly could, but the most common just HTTP APIs right now don't allow the full expressivity. You have to say, I want this one resolver. I want to send my stuff all my stuff in my app to Cloudflare unless you already have some more nuanced system idea. So
can I ask a follow-up?
yeah.
In your email to the ADD mailing list, where you gave some details, used a word currently, and in context it was if the user nominated or app nominated DOH resolver is unreachable, then the Apple APIs will currently switch over to the system described value. So representing the secure access edge managed private networks, I have to tell you that it's never going to be possible on some networks for an app to say, gee, I want apple.com names to be resolved as follows, or for a user to say, I want to use a particular DOH resolver for this name or for all names or for this app. None of that's ever going to work. DOH will always fail. And so your use of the word currently concerns me, as though there might be a time coming where things begin to become impossible for the user because of network edge policy. And so I'm just wondering if you could put some color around the word currently as you used it in your email to the ADD list. Thank you.
The context of where that currently was. What was the rest of that sentence in there?
I gotta go fetch it.
Yeah, me too.
Which I will certainly do. Unfortunately,
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there will certainly be networks on which DoH is blocked or doesn't work for some reason.
Or to that point, Tommy, it was just while Paul was looking, looking at the next question about the is there an order of preference for the selection of a resolver, and is it roughly in that order, or is that?
Yeah, it's roughly that. The MDM profile. So if you're on an MDM profile on a normal unsupervised device, on a user-owned device, that case is actually the same as what we have as number 4. It still has to be, it still is up to the user to be able to select or turn off. Captive portals and VPNs always come above that. So essentially collapse 1 down into 4. There's a bit of an exception for on a supervised device, which is like a corporate owned device, they can prohibit the user from disabling this. They can lock in a VPN, they can lock in a DNS settings, and the user doesn't have choice. But that's on a very, very specific device, like a school-owned device. They could essentially make a decision and not let the user change it.
So they'd be, so if you like, number 1 then would be that scenario, then the corporate device where it's locked down.
Yes, exactly. But that's very restricted, and that wouldn't happen on your personal device. It's not possible. Yep, and then, right, the discovered, how we're doing it experimentally or however it becomes in the future, followed by the apps requirement. Yeah, that's right. The rest of the list is correct. Okay, Paul, do you have the quote here that we're talking about?
If you have the text you sent to the ADD list a few days ago, that will help us.
I do, but I'm not sharing the screen. That's my screen sticking over.
All right. Let's see if I can. Okay. You reposted it here on Encrypted DNS. So it's the one that you sent June 26th to the ADD list, where you said, I'm going to talk about 4 things: system-wide, app top-in, and so on. So where to care about currently appears at the very bottom is a sentence. If connections to the automatically discovered DOH resolvers fail, comma, the system currently, that's the important part, fails over to use traditional DNS.
Yes.
Since it will always fail in my use case, I want to know what I'm facing as an inevitable future.
Got it. So yeah. So let's just talk about like the different failure cases. For the user specified case in which like the user says, I want this all the time, that will currently already fail hard in the same way that if you block a VPN, the VPN will fail hard. That's a security policy that the user required, and if that's in conflict with the network they're on, then they need to work that out. And we will mark the network to say, like, this network's blocking your DNS, and that's why you're breaking, and they can either turn their thing off or add an exception or what have you. Similarly, if the app requires it for a given connection, they can do that, but they can very easily do their own fallback of saying, I require it for this connection. Oh, it didn't work. Now I'm going to not require it. For all the automatic cases, we don't want things to be problematic for the user. We don't want to have these types of breakages. I do not. So having things work and be transparent to the user is always going to be important. And there will be, as you say, networks in which things are blocked. So the currently is saying how things currently work and not committing to what is going to be in the future, but having a good user experience is always going to be important. As pure speculation, I could imagine saying, if you had very, very prevalent automatic encrypted DNS discovery in the future, most things use that. We could have a stricter policy on most networks. And then if we detect that as a given network is blocking that, maybe there's some type of alert to the user of saying, hey, this network doesn't let you do blah, blah, blah privacy mode, which is something that's more visible to the user. Do you want to, stay on this network? And then they can say yes. And then we would essentially add this network to the list of things that automatically gets an exception. But if it's a network that they're on, that's some sketchy cafe that they're just joining for free Wi-Fi, they're like, maybe this isn't worth it. That's the kind of thing, essentially letting the user know. And then if you're on a network that you really need to be on, if you're on a school network and like this is your school device, like that has to work. And if that needs to have DNS be filtered, that's fine as long as it's visible. That's the kind of direction we're thinking. But
thank you.
See. Yep. Okay. So we talked about the order. Let's see. Will the MDM profile be able to say something like absolutely no DoT under any circumstances? Not right now. No. Nothing quite as simple as just saying I don't want anyone else to use this. Again, on a supervised device, like an enterprise-owned device, you can really, really lock down what can be done on the device. You can prevent apps from being installed. You can prevent profiles from being installed. You can do that. But if you're an MDM, just like if it's a personal device that you're just bringing to work that you have with a work account on it, no, your work account wouldn't be able to say, I don't want this user to be able to have encrypted DNS. And the precedent for that is there is no profile that lets you say, we do not let our users have VPNs. We do not let our users use HTTPS. Like that's, we don't let people downgrade people's security.
Yeah, Tommy, this was my question. The use case was from some of our enterprise customers, that have a DNS, both a man-in-the-middle proxy and a, their enterprise DNS server, and they want to ensure that even if they go to a site that would, via discovery, upgrade the connection, that still goes through their proxy, and they're thinking about, is there some way to do that, basically? Which, I mean, if there's a proxy server, if it's a proxy server configured in the OS, that's fine. But typically, if it's just we give you an A record that does, you know, what we think it does.
Got it. Is this a enterprise-owned device?
Yeah, let's say it was an enterprise owned. You know, we can go later about what that means, but basically enterprises want some way on a mobile device to do that.
Yeah, I think the right way to do that for these supervised enterprise-owned devices is to just prevent the other profiles and apps from being installed. Like,
Okay, so that would be the method was, and that would also prevent automatic upgrade then via discovery, or no?
Well, at this point, it doesn't disable that, but the network itself wouldn't let that through. If everything's going through a proxy, that's not going to happen.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That sounds good. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. Is there a way for the device owner to decide or control which DNS protocol or resolver provider is being used across the device, irrespective of other attempts to define these? So if you put in the system-wide configuration, you win. That's essentially it.
Yeah.
And then we use whatever you tell us to use. If you do not say anything, then we'll use something else. Yeah.
Hey, Tommy.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Like on Windows and for Firefox or Chrome, right? There is a provision for IT-owned devices who are using Active Directory. The device can be configured to use the network-provided DoH or DoD server. So would we have similar settings available in Apple for IT-owned devices where the management can configure the device at a system OS level to use as a network-provided DNS server? And then the apps don't have you basically restrict what apps to be installed or what extensions to be installed on browsers. So that way the endpoint uses for all queries the network provided DNS server and not some other server that's hard coded or the user wants to input.
So we don't yet have anything that would come directly from the network. But if and when we do, that would fall in essentially as a lower priority than anything that was configured by the enterprise or configured by the user.
Yeah. Now, my example was, for example, today, Firefox allows Active Directory to be used to configure the DNS settings. Would you have something similar even in Apple devices?
We don't have anything being configured by Active Directory right now. No.
Okay.
You can file a feature request if you want that. Okay.
I see Paul's asked a question on the chat, which I think is related to the one you just answered, Tommy, which is there no option for consumers to say don't give apps their own DNS resolving path?
Well, no. I mean, partly because we can't stop an app from doing its own connections that don't use our APIs at all. Essentially, the way to not let them do their own resolving path is to choose your own resolving path. Mainly, like if our guarantee to an app is that these connections will be secured, we want to be able to give that guarantee and not have that downgraded in security. Once we have a way to, give them a secure option that is what the user wants, then great. But I think it would not be great to tell people to switch over to this API to just have it be less secure than what they could have done otherwise. I think we wouldn't see people adopt it is the same way. Right. Is it possible for end users to specify their own DoH or DoT servers without the use of an app? Yes, you can write so profile is just like a XML file that you can drop on your device. You can write your own. I can, if people are interested, I can send out some examples of how you can configure this. And it's actually a very convenient way if you want to test out any DoH or DoT server. You can just write a little profile and drop it on the device. Paul says, yeah, that's fair.
Topical.
Alrighty. Let's see. If it's not possible to specify, which, well, it is. Okay, what are the rules or guidelines that are in place to regulate the distribution of apps? They have to have entitlements with the App Store. They have to be vetted. Will we deny DNS modification applications? Essentially, it's the same as existing VPN apps. It actually is the same entitlement family. So you have to be essentially at the same level of scrutiny as a VPN. I personally cannot go into the details of where those are allowed and how they are allowed on various app stores.
Are those details available online if anyone's especially interested, Paul? Do you know?
I am not sure. I'm not an expert on the app review. That is its own world, I'd say.
Yeah.
Let's see. Eric Nygren says, will there be a way to configure authentication for DoH servers? What are you thinking here? Like specific?
I hadn't fully thought through all of the ways you might do it, but in some of the, you like either app configured or you're configuring it for a device. If it's like an enterprise product, they may want to have some way of tying that into some authentication mechanism that they're doing.
Like a client cert to authenticate into this.
Like client cert might be one way, with the challenges with that notwithstanding. Something that's like OpenID Connect or some other one of these single sign-on mechanisms might be another obvious path.
Yeah. So there isn't right now, for simplicity and because no one's requested that yet. That's definitely something that would be possible to extend in there. If there became a need for that, that's not really the main use case yet, but we definitely could.
Yeah, I think we have a very similar need for at least roaming users to connect back to use the enterprise DoH server. Then we would need a way to make sure that we can authenticate the client, and at least we see a provision in Firefox where they're taking the user credentials as an input.
Yeah. One other minor detail is we do let a VPN configure a DoH or DoT server to use within the VPN. And so that's another way to kind of access a restricted private server.
Yeah.
Glenn says, will all DNS types be supported? Essentially, are we doing the same messages over this that we do over UDP? Is that the question, really?
Well, yes, but some implementations that are out there today don't support all record types. Some of them only support CNAME and A records.
Weird.
And so I'm curious, will your support, basically, is it a plugin equivalent to 53?
Yeah, so this is, it is running in the same process, the same daemon process that does all of our DNS. So TLS or HTTPS is merely a transport. All of the message handling for DNS is identical to everything else supported on the system.
Okay, so same DNS stack, just
It's
a
a
different
stack.
transport.
Yes, it's just piping over, instead of sitting on a UDP socket, it's encoding the message over TLS or HTTPS.
Okay.
Yeah, so that should include any future types or unassigned types. Yeah. Let's see. Cool. Okay. Are there methods by which Apple can provide DNS-based policy filtering to domains that are served directly by the adaptive DNS model when recursive solvers are not consulted? Can we clarify this question? Is number 8 on here?
I think that was one of mine. So it's, I think it's kind of clear. Is it possible to have a policy model that blocks certain domain access where the device is directly consulting the authoritative resolver? This is basically trying to get the kind of functionality that exists today with DNS filtering of some sort. Is it possible to extend that to where the recursive resolver is no longer consulted?
So we want, essentially, how do we do filtering when we're not using the local recursive?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, this is, I mean, you know, still an open area, I think. We discussed it a little bit in some of our adaptive DNS drafts. Right, like if you could essentially, like, whoever is claiming authority for those names, and we can redirect those names to them, they can clearly do the filtering. So the question is just, how do we know or trust them?
Sure, yeah.
So essentially, if we can have some notion of this is the user trust model for directing those queries over to this person, then they can apply the correct filtering. And I mean, certainly one of the ways that I've seen a lot of developers get excited about the APIs that we're giving here is to direct certain names and domains over to a filtering server so that they can actually apply a filtering service onto there. Now that's a manual thing that the the user can install and opt into, but that's certainly possible.
So when auto discovery occurs, though there's no control, you don't necessarily actually understand or see how an app is going to apply those policies. So again, the first thing that will happen is that malware or phishing providers will deliver their domains through direct authoritative queries, or make that possible, certainly, and create an announcement for those. How is it possible to manage that circumstance with this stack?
So, I mean, the messages that advertise these for these domains could be filtered and blocked themselves, right? So presumably, this is being bootstrapped by my device doing these queries, getting for the automatic discovery case, getting an answer that says, oh yeah, this domain has this other designation that you can go get further information on. If those messages themselves are blocked, then we would not have the automatic discovery. And it'd also be very obvious who is kind of taking that traffic, so that could be monitored and filtered.
Okay, so some question on that is, at what level does that delegation occur? So as an example, does it occur at each domain break, or does it occur on a, I guess I don't understand that, because as an example, again, there are user-defined domain spaces right now where anybody can get a domain in one of like 1,000 different zones. And 99% of those are okay, 1% of those are malware or phishing. How do you prevent that from happening, or how do you create that split between the two sets of namespaces?
Yeah, I mean, if the local network is already doing some filtering for those names, I imagine it can filter in the same way for the records that would allow us to automatically discover. You could essentially, if you want to only whitelist the domains that you do trust, that's certainly a way to do it. From an iOS device standpoint, I think we have other approaches that we already do and would likely want to continue to evolve for blocking things like malware. For example, even with stuff for Safari and Chrome, there is the safe browsing APIs that do checks on the domains that are being fetched in the browser. And so we are largely relying on that and not DNS interception to be able to provide that kind of malware detection and filtering.
Okay, but that doesn't allow any other kind of policy then. It's a global policy applied by Apple.
Well, I mean, there are
clean
also
browsing.
there are parental control policies. I mean, there are other things you can do on device to install that. And I mean, largely the benefit of that is you don't have to rely on whatever network you are currently on or what the network's visibility is, because we can enforce it much more universally across the device. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but the stuff that you just discussed is not installed. I mean, the adaptive DNS stuff where the network can define pretty much what domains it is responsible for is not in the current version, or is it?
Correct, but we're also only doing that discovery over clear text records in the normal exchange, and so you can just block the records that if you're concerned about them opening up something. Alrighty.
Okay.
8 policy models to prevent apps. I think that kind of falls into what we were just talking about.
There's a follow on to that. Yeah.
Number 10, what exactly is the blocking detector mechanism? So this is, so we'll mark a network as blocking DNS, encrypted DNS lookups. It's a heuristic we have. The heuristic will likely continue to evolve as we understand and get more nuanced. But essentially, if we are seeing persistent failures of encrypted DNS connections, but not other types of connectivity problems, then it's essentially saying, yeah, this is, the network is intentionally trying to do some filtering of this. And it's mainly just about giving visibility to the user. Presumably, if you were on a school network, then it's like, yeah, that's life. If you're on a random cafe network, it's maybe something to be a bit more concerned about.
Yeah.
Okay. Who in user call? Who asked this one?
I can't remember actually on that one.
So for cases in which the user has manually installed an app and required encrypted DNS on their device for a given set of networks, in the same way that if they require a VPN and everything falls over, it is kind of, if they call into Apple and have a problem with it, we'll tell them, hey, look, you have a VPN or setting that you required that is causing you to brick your entire network. For cases in which the enterprise does it, I imagine then you call your enterprise support. For cases in which we automatically discover things, we fail open, so we don't want it to ever brick your network. And if it does, then that's on us. And if the app opts into it, they can already, largely brick themselves. So we don't want to push more things to the network operator. I'm sure, there will be some. I think there are already cases of that today when users have various apps or restrictions installed already. And hopefully we can continue to give more good indications to the user and transparency of why things are broken. That, this notification on the Wi-Fi for blocking DNS, it shows up as a privacy thing, but it's also a useful diagnostic in a way that even today, if you have a similar problem and you installed it via VPN or something else, that wouldn't show up. And that notification will show up even if it's like the app has been requiring DoH or DoT, and that is being blocked, and that's why the app is breaking. So there should be some visibility of, this is the layer at which things are falling apart, and that should make it easier to diagnose.
So Tommy, to clarify that then, I mean, today when I run a VPN on my device, I'll see a little VPN symbol pop up.
Yeah.
Will we ever see a DoH symbol pop up?
No. I mean, we also don't see you're using TLS symbol pop up in the same way. I would love to have more visibility of this, like maybe it's not a badge, maybe it's in Control Center or something. That has clearly not happened yet. But I think that, you know, there's also, it's fine if we have a model in which we just are very visible for the problems, that we make sure to bubble up, you know, these are the types of issues that we detect your device is having. Maybe we don't have to kind of list all, here's all the positive things that are currently going on. You're doing encrypted DNS, you're doing this, you're doing that. And those are all working, but rather highlighting the issues.
Okay, that took the wind out of my second part of the question, which was, can it be a donut symbol?
I like
and when
it.
it doesn't work, can it be a broken donut?
Or a donut with a bite out of it.
I like it.
Good, that's good. I'll send that over to our, you know, our crack HI designers and, you know, get them on it. I love it. All right, no more optimizing CDN.
I'm almost going to drop that, because when you gave the updates on the on our lists, that kind of made it clear that as long as someone has put in, if they've chosen to use your DNS, that's cool. If they've chosen to use someone else's, they broke themselves.
Yes. Yep.
It was more that at the beginning, it looked like the applications could sort of blow away the system setting and go, yeah, I'm just going to use mine, which is
that'd be bad.
That'd be unfortunate.
Yeah.
I mean, on the previous point, will there be a way to find out what DNS server they've chosen? Because that might help someone work out why it's wrong. Why is this not working? Your more technical user will be going, what on earth is this thing trying to do? Why is it not working?
Yeah, that is, so there is a, like, you can get it from logs that you can extract from the device. Right now, it's not showing up in the UI. That is a ongoing discussion and debate we have had of whether or not we show that. So
it's
yes,
also
I would like to show
it would be helpful for certain, I mean, if someone's trying, as a corporate would like to know, you know, is this, if this app gets to go and do its own thing, where's it going?
Yep. I will pass that along and use it as more reason for why we should show it.
Donuts coming in soon.
Oh, donut! That just sounds like it's in my head now. I can just see it.
I want royalties.
Dickinson had a question. Is there an option for users to see the content of the queries? See in what way?
Sorry, I might be on mute. I don't know if you can come off mute.
Wireshark is no longer our friend. So, I mean, yes, if you look at the logs from the daemon that we have, the system daemon process, it does log all the messages going back and forth. On macOS, very easy to look at. You just open the console app, filter for MDNS responder, there it is. On iOS, you have to plug it into the Mac and then look at the console app. Yeah, I think showing that type of, you know, like Wireshark is, you know, you've never really been able to do it very well on an iOS device, so that's not particularly new. And yeah, I think as long as you know where to look, it should definitely be there, and we can share information about how to filter the logs correctly. And we've, some people have been asking that on our developer forums, and we've been posting, like, here's the things to filter for on the logs to see content.
So on macOS, while we are on that topic, so the stuff you described with this setting DNS servers iOS only, or is it also macOS?
It's yeah, it's both platforms. The place you interact with it in settings is different. It's like system preferences network instead of.
But does it also mean that on the Mac you have to sort of provide an app to change the settings?
Well, or I mean, yes, you have to either have some code do it, or you just have a profile. Right now, yeah, right now we do not have a UI on the Mac for those details. Although I imagine it will be easier to do that. That just hasn't been done yet.
Okay, so the current case is that I have to write an app to
Or
set my DoH settings
profile.
in the
You
system.
just
Yeah, well, profile.
you write an Excel file and you double click on it and then you're done. It's not that bad. I'll send you the file.
Maybe we could put that in
No,
the
I would also appreciate the examples just to write something.
Yes, yes.
For the code.
Yeah, if people are interested in getting example files to test with, you can send me an email and I'll send that to you. I don't want to send that to, like, to the whole list and spam everyone, but I'll do that.
Great.
Okay. Yeah. So talking about kind of like the latency and stuff, you know, certainly, yeah, you may have issues with that depending on which server you choose for everything. But, you know, the hope is as we do the automatic discovery, we find options that are good there for what we're discovering. We do find that we can use encrypted DNS to the local server or for every locally hosted content. So that's the goal. What is number 4 here? No security.
I think you've kind of covered it in other ways of filtering.
Okay.
You've got to remember a lot of those points were made when the detail about applications was a little bit vague. My reaction was a bit, if an application can set this in general case in a simple way, that could be bad news. Whereas if it's just it'll use something different when nobody's told it what to do, it's annoying, but it's less annoying. It can be managed. You're not talking about almost every app suddenly deciding, "Oh, I can just use this DoH server because it's not blocking those domains I'd really like to get to," and the user's saying, "Actually, no, that's what I was trying to block you because you were trying to do things I didn't like."
Yep. Yes, I mean, so that kind of, I mean, to one of the earlier questions of, do we block people who aren't following the system APIs? No, but it would be interesting. So one of the things that we started doing for privacy apps for privacy of apps in general now is we're going to be adding like what they call like nutrition facts to apps, to essentially say, these are kind of the things that this app does and this is how they track you or whatever. I think going forward and saying, like, if you are not using the system APIs, like if you are building your own stack in which you try to do your own DNS entirely and you can evade the system policies for things, having that called out in some way and having transparency around that would be very good. I think it would be tricky and problematic for us to try to block that because that's
I think that would probably be quite useful. I mean, certainly I could see people, if you're trying to write an MDM policy to get rid of those apps, you need to know this app's bad. And when you find it, you go, hey, look, that's a bad app. It's going to try and do something we don't expect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you can make a proper decision on whether to allow it or to say no.
And even to the point of, like a lot of the stuff we're doing right now for preventing app tracking. So it's not even, let's say, an app trying to access malware, but it's trying to access trackers and ad trackers and stuff kind of fly under the radar and not have to be reported by the system or by the App Store. Certainly doing your own DNS is a way around that. So.
Yeah, and I think some of your Tuesday announcements last week covered some of the additional disclosure that you're looking for, Tommy, on the apps, if I remember rightly.
Okay. Yep. All right. I've got a couple of more questions.
Most of these are mine, and I think they're pretty much all moot now. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So
we got a couple more in the chat too. From Paul Bears.
So I'll switch off the sharing then in that case, as I think we've covered those.
What about Corp MDM settings? Will there be any options to control DoH on devices enrolled in families? Right now we don't have that, but that's definitely something we are looking at and thinking about. I mean, you can set up your family to essentially manage kids' devices in the same way that Enterprise does, but having it be baked more into something like iCloud family settings would be cool. Timescale for implementing automatic detection of local network. Probably post 14.0. I guess unless any local networks want to partner with us more quickly. And I know there's what Comcast and Firefox have done right now with CNAMEs. If we can come up with a solution that would work for our OS, I think at least experimenting with that around our 14.0 timeframe would be good. May take a little bit longer to turn on, but if there are people who want to help detect the local network resolvers, that'd be great.
Thanks.
Hey, got other questions? We're about at the hour.
Bang on the hour, so pretty much. So
can I slip one quick one in?
Good.
Any chance we're going to see an update made available to older versions of OS X, or will you require to run the latest and greatest? Because some of us are still, bound because of the 32-bit crossover.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't generally backport system APIs like that. Yeah, so there are other ways how people are doing it today, but yeah, APIs.
Fair enough. Thought I'd ask.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yep, that's just how things work. I guess our Microsoft friends are a little bit better at getting the stuff to work way back.
If we've got 1 minute left, I'd like to ask a quick one as well, if I can. So when this is live and up and running, will this change Apple's attitude to current software that's available to do DoH via VPN installations such as NextDNS?
I think we will, eagerly work with NextDNS to move over to the preferred APIs and have kind of the preferred user experience. That is the main way. We're not going to be kicking anyone out.
Okay, thank you.
And I should have said, Tommy kindly indicated he could run over a little bit if there were some additional questions, given that we had quite a few submitted in advance. Without encouraging people to come up with more questions, but if you do have any more burning questions, we can run for a few more minutes if anyone does.
If you will allow an observation rather than a question.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a policy change in an Apple iOS update sometime in the last year, which made it much harder to use self-signed X509 certificates with Apple devices. Did not come along with the ability to install the private CA key, which is the way we would normally work around that. And so it created just a lot of trouble. And what I would just somehow like Tommy to mention at lunch when he is eventually allowed back into the infinite loop circle to his colleagues is that some of us are not willing to pay an outsider or use Let's Encrypt or whatever in order that our clients learn to trust our services. We will have a local configuration that does all of that. And my observation is that that is the same as the DNS use case on those networks. We're not going to use an external resolver ever. And Apple has a reputation for being very privacy conscious, and I appreciate that in a lot of ways. So if you could somehow let your colleagues know that we really don't want to be part of a viral global internet where you have to be able to reach outside things in order to reach inside things. That would be good. That would be a marketing distinction for you as well. Thank you very much for explaining everything you've explained and for answering our questions today.
Absolutely. And I do know the change you're talking about, and I've been a bit annoyed by it myself, and sometimes I'm trying to run my own self-censor. So if you particularly want to follow up, I can get you in touch with the right people on the team.
I'll do that by email. Thank you.
Alrighty.
Okay. Last chance for a question from anyone. I think silence is not, in which case I think you've exhausted everyone's questions. I'm impressed, Tommy. I thought it would take us a bit longer than that, so well done for ploughing through them. That's brilliant. I think everyone's a lot better informed now than they were, so consequence of that in your various posts. So I can see from the comments in the chat that I think taking the time to do this has been very much appreciated. So thank you for being brave and
taking the time to listen.
Fantastic. And have a great week, everyone. And I'll post the recording in the next day or so for you to just review and pick up the nuances, because we covered a lot of ground in the last hour.
That's good.
But, thanks, Tommy. That was brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay. Thanks all.